Welcome students to the online NPTEL course Contemporary Architecture and Design. In the previous class we started discussing about the organic architectural style, and here we have seen that this is a derivative of prairie architectural style which evolved in America, and which is against the reaction of neoclassical style which was there in the Chicago exposition, and especially the White City is designed with the style of neoclassical architecture style which comes from the European architecture style, and then American architects and designers thought that there has to be something native of America and which should represent American architecture style. For that we have seen that it comes this organic and prairie style is evolved in the reaction of that. So here we will see this comes just after Bauhaus and Chicago, which is functionalism after that, and in this Chicago style also Chicago architects they imbibed the European architecture style, because Greek classical style was there in the Chicago. That was the inspiration of the Chicago architecture style, and that time in Chicago Fair, Chicago Exposition, the White City is designed based on the neoclassical style, whereas Louis Sullivan's work we have seen it's there. And in White City the styles and everything what American architects felt is representing Europe. It's not native to America. For that they started designing something and which should represent America. For that we have seen prairie. One was the prairie style, which comes from the prairie native style of nature of America, and because America did not have much architectural past, so they had to go back to the nature. Otherwise in case of Europe they had all these movements, all this classical architecture, classical Renaissance, and after Renaissance till Industrial Revolution, most of the movements are in Europe. So if they had to go and take inspiration from something in architecture, it will represent Europe, it will not represent America. That's why they went back to nature, and the nature was the inspiration of the stylistic inspiration of prairie architecture style. In organic architecture style also we have seen that they have taken the inspiration from nature. In case of hollyhock design, which the hollyhock flowers motif has been translated in the abstract format of geometry abstraction, which is predominantly used by Lloyd Wright. Even in the style of glass painting and the interior design, it has been the similar kind of visual style has been used. And also there's a Usonian house we have discussed earlier. That's a term connoted by Lloyd Wright. The Usonia depicts the new American style, which is purely American and which evolves from the nature, and which depicts the organic style. So there's a series of 60 buildings which falls under the Usonian houses. Has quite similarity with the prairie architecture style, but that blends with the natural surrounding and the context of that particular location, and the color palette is the same. And this is a one-story single story building with a lot of horizontal line. This horizontality and the color which comes from the prairie architecture style to organic. So here in the position, if we look at this we are following this timeline, and we are placing each and every architecture style in the timeline, so that there will be a comprehensive understanding of how the building style evolved throughout the time period. So here we see this is a prairie architecture style, which is Roorkee house, and this is Fallingwater. Today we'll discuss the Fallingwater and how Fallingwater, this building represents and takes inspiration and kind of complements the nature that we'll see today. And this, if we look at the stylistic features of these two architectural style, which is just after Bauhaus, but Bauhaus talks about pure geometry in terms of outside facade and pure form, which Of course, there is a pure geometric inspiration is there in in Prairie and organic style, but this is a little bit more ornamental and in nature, and so all these ornamentations we'll see in these styles, but not in Bauhaus. And only Bauhaus will use pure colors, primary colors, which is blue, red, and yellow, and lot of industrial look the new material gives. For example, glass curtain wall and the exposed steel frame structure, and the gray, white and black color gives that look, which is also in Chicago school style. Also, we have seen a similar function which comes first, and then form will come later, which is form follows function, which is connoted by Henry Sullivan. Also has a box-like structure, but ornamentation was there, and this has a color palette has some similarity with the Prairie architecture style and Chicago style, because many architects were also there in Chicago style, are also the same architects are also there in Prairie architecture style, for example Henry Louis Sullivan himself. And in Chicago style we have seen a stylistic exploration to make the building look look horizontal, so that they have divided it into 3 different regions. And here in Prairie, so we have seen a lot of horizontal lines, which is also coming from the Chicago movement. So there are some similarities and the reactions and anti-movements which was coming in the modernism phase 1. That's why the phase 1 we call it a variety. So a lot of different kind of architecture style evolved. So phase 1 is actually from this timeline. So phase 1 has all these architectural movements and Art Deco. We will start discussing Art Deco today itself. So that combines the phase 1. All these different architecture style, they are different from each other, and but there are also some a few similarities are also there, because they are evolved from a same timeline. So that will be the phase 1, and in phase 2 there will be more similarity in a stylistic approach. Before phase 1 we have seen that there was absolutely 2 opposite pole, where went for the machine, and the other style went against the machine. And now in phase 1 different architectural styles which are has some similarity and does not have has few similarities but few dissimilarities. And in phase 2 onwards we will see more similarities and more internationalist style in the later movement of modernism. So in Prairie we have already discussed earlier, it takes from the Prairie grassland, and then low pitch, flat cantilever, pure geometry, native material, pure texture are there. So and also we'll see it's never painted, and the material's own texture and own color will be the final color and the texture of this building. So that is also there in the Roorkee house and other buildings. And if it is plastered, it will be white plaster, and if it is concrete, the concrete's color will be there. So we have seen the few examples of Prairie architecture, and we started discussing the organic architecture style, and we discussed the visual similarity of organic architecture style with the Prairie architecture style and Frank Lloyd Wright's painting. So you see the similarity in the interior design in Prairie and organic architecture style. And we have also discussed how biomorphic pattern is an inspiration of making a geometric abstract design, which comes from the Prairie on the hollyhock flower, and that is how the organic architecture style imbibes the nature imbibes the nature and translate that into their design. So same kind of flowers, floral patterns are there, but it's extremely geometric and modern in nature. And we have seen these biomorphic lines in the previous architecture style, which is Art Nouveau. So whiplash pattern was there. Now as we were discussing more from the more biomorphic style, we are going towards the abstract simplicity. So again, and the same inspiration of a floral pattern in Art Nouveau could have been done in some very fluid way, and with biomorphic lines with no repetition, because in Art Nouveau we have discussed that Art Nouveau never repeats the pattern, so it goes in one pattern will be different from the others, and we have seen that in the Victor Horta's Hotel Tassel and Antonio Gaudi's work in Barcelona, Casamila, and we have seen all the lines are very fluid, and no lines will repeat. So in Casamila's and the metal work, we have seen each and every balcony's metal work is different from each other. But in these styles, also in the later styles where like Art Deco and in the other architectural styles, we'll see the similar repetition, so that it can be mass manufactured, and the motif can be generated in industry, and the same repetition can happen. So we see repetition, and we see more and more geometric pattern. So in here we see total geometry, which represents a nature, but in Art Nouveau we see a lot of curvilinear line which represents nature. Similarly, in the interior also we have seen this earlier is there, and even in the Usonian house we have seen a lot of straight cantilever line. I'm showing this again because now when we discuss the next example, which is Fallingwater building, and some product design of Lloyd Wright, we'll see the similar color tone, similar kind of design vocabulary, and similar line qualities in his other designs. So you will understand that Lloyd Wright's visual vocabulary, what is a visual style, what is the line, color, texture, and way of principles of designs are followed. So now we discuss the Fallingwater building, which is one of his great architectural work, and people do visit this building. This is designed as a residential building, but right now it's a museum because of its beauty and the way it responds to, with the surrounding. So it is designed as a weekend home for a family in 1935. We can see this timeline is quite similar to the same time frame which when the prairie style and organic architecture style was evolved, which is 1920 was the beginning of modern architecture style. In the first phase, just after 1920s, the before there was Art Nouveau, art and craft movement, which is against the machine, and for the machine movement was there. Just after that, the Chicago style and Bauhaus style evolved in 1920s, initial 1920s, and after this in 1930 around this prairie architecture style and organic style evolved. So this is the time frame when all the prairie styles buildings and organic architecture style building were coming up. Later it was altered into 1964, it was converted into a museum, and now if we look at the building, we see from the visual style, we see the cantilevers, which is quite similar, which comes from the prairie architectural style. In Roby House we have seen a straight cantilever and huge overhang projecting outside. And if we look at the volume of this building, it's a juxtaposition of different cuboids coming one after other. And then if you also look at this, there's a lot of horizontal line coming up in the design, because if we look at this solid lines, they create a horizontal line in the visual in the visual. Now if we look at the why this building will be called as an organic architecture style, and if you must have noticed that prairie architecture styles color palette is not followed here. Prairie Roby House has a brown color tint, and this exposed brick will be the color tone of that, but here we see the stone, and here we see a white a plaster. Now if we look at the surrounding in this of the settings of this house in the Pennsylvania, you will see a stone work over here, stone boulder over here, and then a void groove in the stone boulder, and then again a stone boulder, and then a void. On top of that, when the building emerged, that building repeated this rhythm. So rhythm is one of the principle of design. So rhyme, rhythm, a focal, creating a focal point, and all these principles he have maintained. So the rhythm of the nature is translated in the building as well. So solid, void, solid, void. Now he creates in the architecture, it's man-made element from the nature. It's again a solid and then a void. Why this is a void? Because here is a series of windows, which is again an architectural style of Frank Lloyd Wright. So we have seen the series of casement windows in Roby House, in Oak Park's building, and also in Unity Temple and Hollyhock building. The series of window gives a horizontal line, and that here acts as a void. So this window, because it's a very fragile material and you can see through it, so this acts as a void, and then a very solid, robust concrete, and then again a void, and again concrete, and this goes on top of each other, and then from the robustness also diminishes. So if you look at this, a strong stone, and then this is a bigger volume, then this is a smaller, and this goes as a more fragile and smaller volume, which then repeated by this flat, very thin line, cantilever line. So gradually this diminishes from here to towards up. And then if you look at the texture, there is a texture break here, but this gets because this is a stone texture and this is a white plaster, but here we see the stone work is again there. The stone masonry, which complements the color of this stone, is repeated as a robust vertical line, which again visually connects the nature into the building. That is why this building is so important, and this building is a proper manifestation of a pure artwork and blending nature into the building. And even if you look at this building does not is situated on top of a cascade. The water flows in this in the nature, and when the building is built, it's built on top of this cascade, but it does not hamper the flow of the water. The water flows within the building, and we'll see the stone, how the natural stone and water is also visible and amalgamated within the building's different rooms. So we'll see some other photographs of this building. So if you look at the plan of this building, here is the water which flows, and if you look at the plan is not a robust square plan like Unity Temple or other Hollyhock buildings. So this breaks, and this is a very fragile and small cuboids are there, and a lot of angular breaks are there in the plan, because it's it contextually responds with the nature, and nature does not create a pure geometry, but as this is a modernist movement talks about geometry and straight lines, so this natural form, natural contour is divided into many different straight lines and many different cuboids, and and arranging all these cuboids together gives the form, outline of the form. So this does not have a very solid and robust form from outside. This is broken from outside, and that responds to the curve of nature. And also you will see this this stream is passing through this building, and if we look at the floor of this building, we'll see this is also corresponds within the building as well. So if we look at the building inside, so the building's floor has a natural stone. So this the flooring of the building is also the stone which is available in the nature, and he did not polish the stone, and this undulations of the natural stones are also there in the inside the building. So, and if you look at the strong similar cantilever lines will be visible in the inside the building as well. So if you see this solid and void which is replicated here, and the outside periphery of the building is very does not follow a particular line. So if you look at the structural member which is column inside this glass curtain wall, the glass windows, and they don't match with each other, so that gives a more fluid forms. And then if we look at this cantilever, it's a very thin cantilever which also has a similarity with the Prairie architectural style, and his style of long casement windows are also there. And in between you will see this kind of stone masonry work, which is also, which replicates the stone two stone boulders on top of which the Fallingwater building is constructed. So that is followed within the building as well. Now from each and every site there is a small niche and small corners. You will see this kind of nature which blends within the building. So natural materials are also there in the built form, and corner elements of this of the windows is avoided, so that it gives a maximum view of from the corner of the building, because this corner window gives a wider viewpoint. Now if we look at there are other photographs you can search in net that within the building as well, this kind of stone, natural stones are there inside the interior of the building near the fireplace. And the fireplace is what you see in the vertical element, that is the fireplace, and which has a similar kind of stonework, which is the vertical element we were showing in the first photograph. This one comes from the fireplace. So this is the entry of the building. If we look at the plan from here, the entry is, and here the steps are gradually going down. So this is a natural ramp, and on top of the natural ramp and this kind of small steps, so you will see a cantilever which has a very thin and fragile vertical support, which blends with the trees, and we don't see the vertical support, and there's a step like thin cantilever which is going as a shade of this entrance. So this is the entrance of the building, and when you enter, and in some cases if you look at this plan somewhere here, this kind of corners are created. So this is hanging from the cantilever, and these hanging steps comes very close to the water body, and you can and this is how the building blends with the nature from within the built form as well. And you will see the similar stone is used in every different corner of this building, so that it takes the nature inside the building as well. And now if we look at some other works of Frank Lloyd Wright, which is not architecture, also in industrial design and in painting and window frame design. So we see the similar kind of pattern in Frank Lloyd Wright's design. So we have already discussed this Hollyhock building's interior design. So we see more clearly that this kind of flower, if you look at the flower and its stem, is there in the furniture design, and also similar kind of lines and straight lines are also there. And if you look at this plan, this is again a rectangle, and then series of straight lines with woodworks is also there, same Hollyhock pattern, and similar kind of straight lines and pure geometry is there in his painting and also in his in industrial design. Now this is the vase designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, but if you look carefully, so there's many other series of vases there by Frank Lloyd Wright. There you will see a pattern which comes from Hollyhock design as well, and so the bigger cuboid, and on top of that a smaller cuboid will come. So this is from his series of vase design. Two of the vases are selected as here for discussion, and here if you look at the way he is treating the decorating the vase is quite similar the way he is decorating the window. So this kind of straight lines and triangles are also there in the decoration of the vase. And if you look at, this is also a pattern evolved from the hollyhock flower, and the same kind of lines are used. So in this vase as well, so it's the similar lines are used in this design. So there are many other furniture design and interior design, industrial design by Frank Lloyd Wright. If you look more through more examples, and you will see similarity of the style, of his style. So he also designed some murals, and also in the furniture, what we were discussing, the woodworks and these straight lines which breaks and passes through each other, which is also there in different cases of the furniture design in the interior. And also he designed some sculpture. This is a sculpture, this is a sculpture of chess, which is the outdoor garden chess, and these sculptures are designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And also this, and if you look at the sculpture carefully, you will see a similar visual style in his sculpture. So through his painting to glasswork, glass design, and the window design, and the interior design, and the industrial design, and the sculptures has a similarity in the visual style. So if you look at, the sculptures are again broken into some pure geometric form, and this is a human being, but it's broken in some cuboid. And if you look carefully, this kind of angular lines are there, which is also there in the here and in the window design. And if you look at the face, it is also broken in some geometry. And if you look at the figures, these straight line and these series of lines which comes from his painting, and even in in hollyhock houses interior is there, and similar kind of line works are also there in each and every sculpture he have designed. And if you look at, the ornamentation has these kind of beads and solid and void, which is there in his hollyhock design, and the other design patterns which he have derived, and also there in the window design. You can see the similarity of this sculpture design. Now in the vase as well, this is a garden vase, or the flower bed in Roorkee house. We have seen the plan is square, and then circle, and then again a square. Here also, if you look at the plan, this is a circle and then a square. So he's playing with circle and square, and then creating a design out of it. And if you look at, there are many other designs of vase designs, and flower pots and basins designed for the outside garden landscape, designed by him. So there he is mixing the circle with square. Even in his the light he have designed in Unity Temple and in Roorkee House, you will see a square frame and a globe inside the light. What he is doing in the furniture design is also his blendings pure circle with square. Even one of his vase is designed like vase generally has a square circular cross section, but here it's mixed. So if you see the vase, it has a square frame, and the vase will be something in between, and then the square frame is connecting the vase. So if you look at, the vase is there in the cross section, but from outside there's a fin coming out from the vase from all the four sides. So in the plan you will see this, but these four sections from four sides are coming out from the vase. So you see more examples of the design of vases and flower pots by F.L. Wright. You will see this mixing the geometry of circular and cuboid together, which you will see in the interior design like this, and especially in the Roorkee houses design, you will see this similar kind of mixing circle and a square. So you have seen it earlier, I have shown you in the Roorkee houses design, so you will remember how this circle and square he is blending in his design. In the next we will start discussing the Art Deco style, which just comes after Prairie and organic movement. So Art Deco style, as earlier we were talking about, that Art Deco style is highly ornamental, and it takes a lot of inspiration from Art Nouveau style, but again, the way we have seen in Prairie and organic architectural style, there is a geometric abstraction of natural form. For example, the way Frank Lloyd Wright was translating the hollyhock flower into the pure geometry. So that similar form, similar transformation is used in Art Deco, but it's again ornamental, and it's a reaction against the Bauhaus movement. Bauhaus talks about minimalism, and Bauhaus talks about functionality, and form will have a lesser priority than function. But Art Deco is talking about form, and aesthetics is very important in there. But Art Deco style is more towards the machine aesthetics, and so it can be mass produced, and the style of machine aesthetics is blended in Art Deco, which is different from the Art Nouveau style. So if we look at the time frame, Art Deco comes here, which is highly ornamental, as we were discussing. Which is coming down side of this frame is more ornamental in nature. So it has a similarity with the Art Nouveau style, but it is more abstract and more geometric in nature, and which is a reaction against the Bauhaus movement, which was minimal in aesthetic style. So if we look at Art Deco, so clearly we see there's a lot of ornamentation. It's not minimal at all. A lot of forms coming, and a lot of different shapes are superimposed, and there's a lot of ornamentations are there. But it has a similarity with Art Nouveau, but this biomorphic lines we will not see. But it is a reaction against the Bauhaus movement, which is a pure cuboid and less in ornamentation. And we'll see later there's again a movement which is internationalist style, which opposes Art Deco, which is again going back to minimalist style and pure geometry. So it again from more aesthetic value and more ornamentation to going towards the less ornamentation, and then again going back to the more ornamentation, and then again going to the less ornamentation. This is how the modern phase 1 was changing rapidly with the different philosophy and different architectural visual style. So if we look at Art Deco, the term Art Deco came from the International Exposition of Modern Industrial and Decorative Arts in 1925, where in the similar time this Prairie or other architectural styles were still going on, and that time architect Le Corbusier, and who's a famous architect and whose work is there throughout different modern movements, and as well as the postmodern movements. So we'll see the mostly in the modern movement we'll see not only in these styles, but also the other styles are there. So but most of the styles are not in Art Deco style. So this is just his he's connoting the way Art Deco is. And then the form of art, and which we will discuss later, that handcrafted traditional motifs with machine made imageries are blended together, so that there will be decorations, but which machine can make, so that the decoration can be repeated. And then again this decoration is repetitive, unlike the Art Nouveau style. And we'll discuss the Art Nouveau style. And Art Nouveau style also emerged from architecture, poster and painting design, and as well as the furniture design. So it encompasses all the creative art forms, from architecture to industrial design to painting and commercial posters and all these things. So we'll discuss this in the next class. Thank you.